Montana Territory, July 1884. The horse reared high, nostrils flaring, hooves slicing the hot air, then bucked hard. Willow Sutton hit the dirt with a sickening thud, her breath knocked clean out of her lungs and pain lancing through her ribs. She heard the thunder of hooves fading as the spooked mare bolted toward the tree line. Dust swirled around her face. Her bonnet had come loose and her braid lay crooked against her shoulder. She rolled to her side, groaning, and tried to get up. Her ankle gave out beneath her. "Damn it," she whispered, swallowing the panic rising in her throat. A shadow fell across her. Someone dismounted, fast boots crunching gravel and brush. Then strong arms, warm and steady, slid beneath her shoulders and knees. "I got you," a man's voice said, low and rough from disuse, but sure. "You're all right now." Willow blinked up into the face of a stranger, sun-browned skin, dark blonde hair brushing under a wide-brimmed hat, and blue eyes that looked like they belonged to someone who had lost too much to speak easily. He lifted her like she weighed nothing, carried her toward the edge of the trail where his horse stood tied to a scrub pine. He laid her down gently on a blanket, careful with her ankle. I think it's twisted," she said, wincing as she tried again to sit up. "You should not move it." He pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and unscrewed the cap. "Drink." She hesitated, then took a sip. The water was warm, but it steadied her. "Thank you," she murmured, handing it back. I lost control of her. Something in the brush, I do not know what it was. His gaze swept the trees. "Cougar, maybe, or just the heat. Horses get jumpy when the sun sits like that." She nodded, still shaky. "I'm Willow Sutton. I was riding south from Helena. My brother's ranch is 2 miles that way. I know the trail." "Name's Holden Kearney." His name suited him, quiet, solid, like a man who did not speak unless it mattered. Willow studied him as he crouched by her foot, unwrapping the boot with care. Calloused hands, steady movements. "You a ranch hand?" "Used to be." "Not anymore." "What are you now?" He gave a faint shrug. "Passing through." She watched him secure a strip of cloth around her ankle, tight enough to hold but not to hurt. His touch was gentle. Too gentle for a man who looked like he carried a storm in his chest. "Willow," he said suddenly, looking up. "You have people nearby." "My brother, yes. But he's off buying cattle in Bozeman, left 2 days ago. I was supposed to stay at the ranch with my nephew, Owen. He is 7. She paused. "I did not mean to be gone this long." "I was only out for a short ride." Holden glanced at the sun. "It'll be dark in an hour. You should not ride alone this close to nightfall." "I know," she said, a little sharper than she meant. Sometimes I need to breathe. To be alone." He did not answer, just reached into his saddlebag for a strip of dried meat and offered it to her. She took it, her hands trembling as she ate. Holden sat back on his heels, watching her. "That boy of yours, he at the ranch now," she nodded, "with our cook, Maisie. She is near 60 but tough as nails. Still, I should get back. He scares easy." Holden stood and reached for his reins. "I will take you there." "You do not have to," I said. "I will." She blinked at the firm tone, surprised but not offended. Something in her chest shifted. He was not the sort of man to hover or flatter. But he had not once looked away from her, not when she fell, not now. He helped her up again, this time slower, with her leaning heavy into him. His body was warm and solid beside hers, and she noticed how he kept his arm around her waist even once she was upright. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Willow nodded. "I think so." He lifted her onto his horse, then climbed up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, and she felt the strength of him all around her, steady and unmoving. She had not been held like that since before the war took her father. Not even by the man she almost married. They rode in silence, the sky turning soft gold around them. The scent of pine and dust clung to the wind. Willow leaned back slightly and felt his breath near her ear. "You always ride alone?" he asked. "Only when I need to think." "What are you thinking about?" She hesitated. "Starting over." He was quiet for a long time. "Me too." They reached the ranch just as the last of the light fell behind the distant hills. Owen came running from the porch barefoot, his brown curls bouncing. "Aunt Willow," she smiled wide through the ache in her ribs. "I'm all right, honey." Owen stopped short at the sight of Holden. His eyes narrowed. "Who's that?" "This is Mr. Kearney. He helped me when my horse spooked." Holden dismounted and helped her down. Owen moved instantly to her side, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You were gone too long," he whispered. "I know, sweetheart." "I am sorry." Holden cleared his throat. "I will see to your horse. She ran east." "You do not have to do that," Willow said again. He tipped his hat. "I want to." He turned and walked toward the barn without another word. Maisie came out onto the porch just then, her eyes wide. "Lord Almighty, girl, what happened?" Willow leaned heavily on the railing. "A fall, but I am all right. Holden helped." Maisie glanced after him. "That man's got the look of someone who lost more than he was ready to." Willow said nothing. She just watched him move, watched the quiet way he stroked the side of her panicked mare when he returned with her an hour later, watched how he never once asked for thanks. That night, long after Owen was asleep and the house had gone quiet, Willow stepped out onto the porch. Holden was sitting on the bench, hat in his lap, looking out toward the night. "You all right?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Could not sleep." She sat beside him, her ankle still wrapped tight. "You meant it," she said. "About starting over." He looked at her, his eyes unreadable in the dark. "I lost my family 3 years ago. Fever took my wife and boy. After that I rode, never stayed anywhere more than a week." Her heart broke, slow and quiet, like the creak of the porch boards beneath them. "I am sorry," he nodded. "You left my fiancé after the war. He came back mean. My mama died last spring. My brother's all I got left." They sat in silence for a long while, then he turned to her, voice low. "You feel it too, do you not?" She swallowed. "Yes." He reached out, slow and sure, and took her hand in his. His calloused thumb brushed against her knuckles, and her heart settled like it had been waiting to rest there all along. Neither of them said another word, but their hands stayed joined until the stars began to fade. The morning broke clear and pale, the kind of light that had no weight but still made every corner of the valley visible. The Sutton ranch sat still under that sky, fences casting long shadows, the barn doors yawning open beneath a quiet wind. Willow stood in the kitchen, balancing on one foot, elbow deep in biscuit dough. Her ankle throbbed with each step, but she kept at it, jaw tight. The bruising had deepened overnight, but Maisie had already taken over the garden, and Owen was finishing his letters at the table, tongue pressed against his lip in concentration. When Holden stepped through the back door, he carried a bucket of well water in one hand and a bundle of chopped wood under the other arm. "You didn't have to do that," Willow said without turning. "I know." He set the bucket beside the wash basin, then leaned the wood by the stove. She wiped her hands and looked at him. "Why are you still here?" He met her eyes. "Because you didn't ask me to leave." Owen lifted his head. "He helped me with the hens this morning, said one of 'em's got a limp foot." Willow blinked. "I didn't hear that." "Didn't want to wake you," Holden said. "She's favoring the left leg, could be a thorn." She studied him across the room. "You know chickens?" "I know how to watch for pain." She folded the towel over the dough and stepped closer. "You fixed my gate too," he nodded once. Hinges were sagging. She glanced out the window. "You planning on fixing everything that's broken around here, if you'll let me?" She didn't speak right away. Her hands twisted in the fabric of her apron before she turned back to the stove. "There's fence work that needs doing." "I saw," he said, already reaching for his hat. "I'll start near the south pasture." He left without waiting for more, and she watched him cross the yard, the way he moved with purpose but not hurry, like he knew exactly how much weight each step should carry. When Willow headed out later, her nephew trailing behind with a pail of nails too big for his hands, she found Holden kneeling in the dust, one knee braced, arms steady as he pulled a rail back into place. Sawdust clung to his sleeves. She leaned her hip against the post. "You always work this quiet? No use wasting breath on wood." Owen dropped the nail pail beside him. "He showed me how to check the grain, said if it's crooked the rail won't hold." Holden straightened, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "He learns fast." Willow crouched, careful of her ankle, and ran her hand along the smooth plane of the board. "You built fences before, Built a lot of things, he said, eyes on her now. She looked up. You were a carpenter before the war. She waited, but he said no more. She didn't press. Instead, she stood and brushed the dust from her skirts. Come to supper tonight, he hesitated. You sure? You helped more than anyone's helped in a long while. That deserves a hot meal, he nodded. I'll wash up first. That evening, the table was laid with roasted squash, cornbread, and a pot of elk stew Maisie had started before dawn. Owen talked through most of the meal, detailing how Holden had shown him how to sharpen a post without splitting it. Willow watched the way Holden listened, never interrupting, but always saying just enough to make the boy feel seen. After the dishes were cleared and Maisie took Owen in for a bath, Willow stepped onto the porch, where Holden stood watching the last of the light leave the hills. She joined him, arms folded. You miss building? She asked. Some days, he said. It's different now, nothing fits the way it used to. She turned to him. You ever think about staying somewhere again? His jaw worked slightly. I think about what it would take. And his eyes met hers. It'd have to be a place that let me forget what I lost, or maybe remember it without breaking. The wind moved through the dry grass. Willow's voice was soft. This land's not easy, it doesn't offer much, but it gives back what you put in. He nodded slowly. I can see that. They stood in silence for a long stretch, the kind that didn't ask to be filled. Then she said, You could sleep in the bunkhouse if you're thinking of staying a few days. His eyes searched hers, careful. You sure? I wouldn't have said it if I wasn't. He tipped his head once. I'll get my things. As he stepped off the porch, she watched him cross the yard again, same steady steps, same quiet strength. But this time she felt something ease in her chest. A kind of space opening up that hadn't been there before, not hope exactly. But the start of it. The bunkhouse had not seen company in months. Dust clung to the rafters and the mattress sagged in the middle, but Holden laid his bedroll down without complaint. He rose early, always before the rooster, and took to the west fence line without waiting for direction. Willow watched from the kitchen window as he moved through the tall grass, sleeves pushed to his elbows, hands steady with the hammer. By the third morning, Owen had stopped waiting for invitation. He followed Holden out before breakfast, dragging a short-handled shovel over his shoulder. Willow caught them walking the ridge together, heads bent in quiet talk, and something warm stirred low in her chest. That afternoon she found Holden kneeling beside the chicken coop, sleeves damp with lye soap, scrubbing rust off the hinges with a wire brush. She leaned against the fence post, arms crossed. You always this restless? He looked up, sun catching in the lines around his eyes. Idle hands don't sit easy with me, she tilted her head. You ever try sitting still? He rested back on his heels. Once, didn't last. She stepped closer, brushing straw off the top rail. What did you do before you came through here? Between leaving the last place and finding this one. Worked cattle for a while near Deer Lodge. Took a job hauling freight up past the Judith River. Winter came on hard, lost 2 mules and the trail boss to frostbite. After that, I just kept moving, looking for something, looking for less mostly. She studied him, the way his fingers gripped the brush even as he paused. You don't talk like a man who's running. I'm not, just don't know where I belong. She nodded slowly. You ever think it might not be about the place? His eyes held hers. What else would it be? She didn't answer. Not then. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the cottonwoods, Holden stood with Owen near the paddock, showing him how to check a horse's hoof for stones. Willow watched from the porch, a thread of unease winding through her. She'd spent years building routines solid enough to hold her together. Now, with every passing day, Holden was becoming part of them. After Owen was put to bed, she found Holden seated on the back steps, a tin cup of coffee cooling beside him. She sat down without invitation. I had a letter once, she said, voice low. Came 3 weeks after the wedding was called off, from the man I'd almost married. Said he'd taken work out east, said he hoped I'd find someone steady. Holden didn't turn toward her, but his hand stilled around the cup. I read it once and burned it, she continued. Not out of anger, just didn't want to give it a place on my shelf, he nodded. Sometimes ashes weigh less than paper. She glanced down at her lap. I think I stopped hoping after that, started tending to things that didn't ask much: fences, root vegetables, a boy who needed someone. He set his cup aside. You've done more than tend. She looked up at him. So have you. The breeze had a bite to it. The scent of wood smoke drifted in from the stove chimney. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. You planning to leave soon? She asked. He didn't answer right away. His gaze lingered on the horizon where the land rolled soft and low toward the Bitterroot Range. I was, he said. But Owen asked if I'd teach him how to mend a halter next week. She waited. And you, he added quieter, you haven't asked me to go. I haven't, she agreed. His thumb brushed a crack in the step beside her. I've carried a lot of silence these past years. It's easy to forget how to speak when no one's listening. Willow turned toward him, hand resting near his. You're not alone here. His fingers found hers, not sudden, not searching. Just there, warm and calloused and sure. I know, he said. They sat like that while the stars came out, the hush between them not empty but full of something slow and growing. No promises, no declarations. Just two people who had learned the weight of sorrow and were beginning, finally, to feel the shape of something else. The cottonwoods had begun to yellow at the edges, the first quiet sign that summer was shifting. Willow stood by the root cellar, apron bundled with early onions, when Holden came walking up from the upper pasture. His shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat, and a sliver of blood darkened the skin above his knuckles. She narrowed her eyes. What happened? He glanced down at his hand. Barbed wire split on an old post. Should have seen it coming. She dropped the bundle of onions beside the cellar door and reached for his wrist. You need to wash it out. I was headed to the pump. Come inside. It'll get infected if you let it sit. He followed her into the kitchen, kicking his boots off at the door. The basin was already full from the morning draw. She took a clean cloth from the peg, dipped it, and began cleaning the wound with steady hands. You're lucky, she said. Could have been deeper. Doesn't feel lucky. You'll keep the use of it. That's luck enough. He watched her silently, the way her brow furrowed as she worked, how her fingertips pressed against the edge of the wound just firm enough to ease the blood away. You always tend things this careful, he asked. If I don't, they don't last. She looked up, met his gaze, and for a moment neither moved. You ever think about what you do, she said, voice quieter now, if you stopped wandering? He didn't answer immediately. She tied a strip of muslin around his hand while he thought. I'd find a stretch of land that didn't ask too much, he said finally. Start small, a few head of cattle, maybe a shop if I could get lumber steady. She tied the knot tight. You'd build again, he nodded. I miss shaping something that stays. She stepped back. There's a plot west of the creek. It's never been fenced, but it's good ground. My brother meant to use it, but never did. Holden flexed his bandaged hand once, then looked at her. You offering? I'm saying you could stay. You've earned more than the bunkhouse. He leaned against the sink, the air between them quiet but not uncertain. I don't want to take more than you're ready to give, he said. You're not taking, she replied. You're giving back every day. His eyes searched hers. You sure? She nodded. I've lived with ghosts long enough. It's time I filled the house with someone who's still breathing. He reached for her hand, the unbandaged one, and wove their fingers together. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Not unless you send me. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of him. Then let's see what we can build. Outside, Owen's voice rang out from the barn, calling for them to see what he'd done with the new calf pen. They didn't rush to answer. They stood still, hands joined, the first day of something new unfolding around them like the slow bend of river grass in warm wind. Willow stepped into the barn just after sunrise, the sky outside still the color of wet ash. The smell of fresh hay and warm animals wrapped around her, grounding her as she moved down the row of stalls. She found Holden already there, crouched near the calf pen, adjusting the new gate latch with a quiet focus that had become familiar. He didn't look up when she approached, but his voice reached her steady as ever. Latch kept slipping last night, thought I'd see to it before Owen got underfoot. She crouched beside him, careful on her healing ankle, and watched his hands move with patience over the wood. "You always fix things before anyone else knows they're broken?" "I try to," he said. "Keeps the world from unraveling faster than it has to." She reached out and tested the latch. It held firm. "You thinking you might build something else?" "Something that's yours." He stood, brushing straw from his trousers. "Thought about it. That plot you mentioned, it's good land, sits high enough to drain clean. I walked it yesterday." She straightened beside him. "You thinking of building a house?" "If I did," he said, "I'd want it to have windows that face east, catch morning light, and a porch deep enough for sitting through storms." Her voice softened. "You plan to sit there alone?" He looked at her then, no hesitation in his gaze. "Not if you'll sit with me." She reached for his hand, the one still bandaged, and held it gently. "I've never built anything from the ground up," she said, "but I'd like to try." They stood there, quiet and sure, the morning light catching on the dust motes between them. Later that week, Holden began to clear the brush from the edge of the creek plot. Owen helped where he could, hauling small stones to the pile by the edge, his arms straining with the effort. Willow brought water in a pail each afternoon, watching the shape of a future take root in the tilled soil and staked corners. One evening, as dusk pressed soft against the valley rim, she found Holden at the table, his rough hands sketching a rough floor plan on a scrap of paper. He looked up as she entered. "I've been thinking," he said. "Come winter, we'll need a chimney strong enough to hold heat through the freeze, and space enough for Owen to have a room of his own." She crossed to him, resting her hand over his. "You've already made space for him. He looks for you now when he's proud or when he's scared." Holden nodded, voice quiet. "I wasn't sure I remembered how to be steady for someone, but he makes it easier." "You do that for him," she said. "And for me." He turned his hand beneath hers, threading their fingers together. "Then let's finish this place, and move in before the first frost." By early October, the frame of the house stood tall against the sky. Owen painted the porch posts with careful strokes, his tongue tucked at the corner of his mouth. Willow sewed curtains from an old bolt of calico, her stitches steady in the evenings while Holden read to Owen from a book he'd found in Helena, a story of mountains and men who learned to live with them. They moved in on a cold morning, breath fogging in the air as they carried the last of their things from the wagon. Maisie, wrapped in her wool shawl, handed over a tin of biscuits and a jar of preserved apples before returning to the main house. That night, the three of them sat around the hearth, the fire catching slow and bright. Willow leaned into Holden's side, her head resting against his shoulder. Owen lay curled on the rug nearby, already half asleep beneath a quilt. Holden looked down at her, voice low. "You still sure?" She smiled against his shirt. "I've never been more." He wrapped his arm around her, drawing her close. "Then this is home." The wind rose outside, rustling the eaves, but inside the walls stood firm and the warmth held fast. Years passed. The garden grew behind the house, neat rows of beans and corn turning gold in the late summers. Willow took on sewing for neighbors, her mending known for its lasting seams. Holden built a second shed and took in carpentry work when the weather allowed window frames, porch repairs, even a cradle for a young couple downriver. Owen grew tall and sure-footed, his hands calloused from the work of land but his eyes still bright with curiosity. He rode into town on his own by the time he was 12, returning with flour sacks and stories of what he'd seen. On the porch in the evenings, Holden and Willow sat side by side, watching the light stretch long across the fields. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't need to. One night, years after the day she fell from her horse, Willow leaned her head against Holden's shoulder and said, "You remember when you first carried me out of the dust?" "I remember." "I didn't know then how much ground we'd cover." He kissed the top of her head, his voice steady. "We're still walking, Willow." She reached for his hand, the one that once bore a scar above the knuckle, now faded with time. "I know. I'm glad we're walking together." And they were two lives stitched side by side, the seams strong and lasting, the warmth of their home built slow and sure, with love earned and steady beneath every beam.